Welcome back, one and all, to the RimWorld Eternal Winter series, where today, my good friends, we are having a very simple meal together. We're just going to have a real nice time. Oh, wait a minute, I forgot. We have a siege going on. Yes, indeed. In case you forgot, at the end of last episode, it would appear that House Hess has sent out quite the raiding party to try and besiege our beloved keep. To do so, it would appear that they've actually prepared their very own mortar technology, creating a large fortress mortar, which will also allow them to not only shoot mortar rounds, but also stone chunks as well. I suppose really what I'm trying to get across here is just how dangerous this fortress mortar really is. They essentially have infinite ammo while they're here because the environment is their weapon. While we, on the other hand, have to have Rosh rush into our workshop where he can frantically try to throw together some mortar rounds out of steel so that we can begin firing back. The entire process takes much longer for us because we're having to make our ammo, load our ammo, which takes a while, and then of course fire it. Now, not to take away from the intensity of the siege or anything, or to kind of derail the battle, but I did find another Gorlan tree seed here. I don't know, I guess we just glossed over it the first time, but we do have one now. So of course, assuming we all survive this battle, somebody will be able to plant this. Now back to the battle, I will say luckily we had managed to graze a few of them with our first mortar shot. I don't think we ever really got any absolute direct hits, but it was enough to injure them. I will say that that is a small advantage to the actual mortar shells that we're using. They're the large gunstones, which have something of an explosive effect, while stone chunks don't really have that same effect. Of course though, the raiders from House Hess are using a combination of the two of them, so we don't really have an advantage per se. Now, with several of the raiders injured though, we decided that it would be the perfect time for us to try and strike them. We began trying to move everyone into position around the hill next to the very small pond where House Hess was set up. We of course were immediately met with fireballs from the sorceress that they had brought along with them. We then would use Rosh's combat command to try and give all of our soldiers a boost during the battle. Just as well, we would use Moinkow's light burst ability to try and blind all of the raiders. With them temporarily blinded, they could not see us to try and fire back at us, so we continued raining musket balls and arrows at them until they decided to try and flee through the caves. A shot from Rosh's musket managed to severely wound the sorceress, which slowed her down significantly, ultimately leading to her demise. She was dead and the others continued to flee. The threat had finally been neutralized. We took her fireball wand back to our keep, just as well as the new Gorlan seed that I had spotted during the battle. I could have swore that I had another, and I believe this one must be it, and it must not have went anywhere because of the cold temperature. I don't know, but we do have one. And of course, we immediately began a linking ceremony with the tree as well as Rosh, and things went pretty well. I also went ahead and went back through and chose our Woodmaker Dryads. Now, once again, if you guys have any names for these, I will be giving these two new Dryads two new names since our last two died. And of course, I promised to take better care of them. We took some time and began just kind of repairing and building new walls and storage facilities and whatnot in our warehouse. This was of course destroyed during the siege as a mortar round came right through the roof, blowing up several shelves, tanning racks, as well as our smithing table, which I didn't realize until later on. After that was completed, we would also begin repairing the castle walls of our towers that surround the entire keep to try and ensure their integrity. Late one night as well, we had an armor smith stop in and we began selling all of our weapons and whatnot that we didn't need to them, and we ended up purchasing some normal size gunstones for our mortar. These were much smaller, but they still packed quite a punch, and we didn't have to use any steel to make them, which was obviously the most important part with how scarce steel is. From here on out, I'm going to try and ensure that we at least have a small stockpile of some type of mortar round around, that way we can always try to defend ourselves from sieges. And while we're on the topic of defending ourselves, I know a lot of you guys have mentioned this and I have noticed it as well. In front of one of our southern towers, we actually have a lot of stone, and our enemies are are using these stones as cover when fighting with us, so I decided that we'd go ahead and mine all of that out. And this was something of a double whammy, of course, because not only would we be taking away some type of defense that our enemies could use against us, but obviously we're going to use all the stone chunks that we get from this to build more traps, barricades, towers, castle walls, all of that stuff. Now by this point I decided to go ahead and build an art bench where our smithing table actually was, and somehow still didn't notice that it was missing. I went ahead and added a build to make small sculptures out of granite blocks. Yes, it is perfect for defenses, but we have a massive overabundance, so we're going to use it for defenses as well as artwork. And besides, they're being made by Zippy, the queen, or something, whatever title we plan on giving her, herself. We would actually use some of these sculptures throughout our throne room, but more importantly as well our library, which we also began building some bookshelves in. Now these bookshelves are from Medieval Overhaul, and they actually increase the research speed of a research bench. Obviously, of course, this was much needed as we spent copious amounts of time trying to research into new technologies throughout the Medieval Overhaul branches as well as the main branches. But of course, as Lim continues to conduct some very much needed research, we are still awaiting our rice, but more importantly our flax to grow. I'm sure you guys of course remember last episode as I was talking about when we planted the flax, we're wanting to use this flax to spin into linen, which is kind of like the Medieval Overhaul equivalent of cloth that we can actually use in many of our recreation facilities that we hope to build. I do of course have my eye on one recreation facility in particular that I'd definitely like to try and build today, and now that we finally have our first harvest of flax, we're going to go ahead and do that. But obviously, of course, first we need Moin Cow here to begin spinning it into some beautiful, nice, smooth linen sheets, which thankfully she did, and she did very quickly. Now with that finally completed, we can begin construction on our Rim of War game, which is described as a tabletop game for simulating a war game. It's a great way to test your strategic skills as well as a bit of luck. Now, I do have to say though, to me this personally sounds less like a strategic game that we would want to share with everyone in the entire keep, including our slave Moin Cow, who we definitely don't want to rebel or have any plans of escaping or anything, and it sounds more like some type of actual strategy board that we would use for planning out attacks and things like that. So what I've decided to do is to dig out a section next to the throne room where we could actually put this and use to plan out battles. However, it was during this time that we received the notification that a pack of Dare had entered the area, which apparently is a large mystical creature that is a mix of a giant deer as well as a giant bear, and the pack actually turned out to be one animal. It is described as having majestic antlers that we could possibly sell, and that its meat actually gives a mood boost when eaten, so of course we decided that we wanted to hunt it. But instead of hunting it like a normal animal, we would try to use Moin Cow's abilities against it, but this barely seemed to scratch the animal and it began to try and run away, eventually leaving the map unfortunately. This of course does not mean that we may not have another opportunity in the future to try and hunt this mystical beast, or maybe even tame it. Which does bring me to my next question: what kind of animals would you guys like to see us tame here? Or would you like to see some type of farm or something like that? Would you like to see us have giant packs of polar bears or even Arctic wolves and coyotes? Be sure to let me know your suggestions. We ended up having a quest sometime later. Apparently some travelers had told us about an injured brave named Sissy who was injured by an ambush or something to that effect, and if we went and rescued him he would join us here, so of course we sent out a small caravan. Of course though, due to the freezing temperatures and large amounts of snow and ice on the roads even, it's going to take quite a while to get to him. In the meantime though, we had our very first woodmaker dryad emerge from his cocoon. Hopefully it won't be too much longer and we should have a second as Rosh continues to strengthen his bond with the tree. Later on that night, as the moon arrived in the sky just above the extremely tall mountains and what few pine trees actually remain, we were spending hours on end attempting to bring back many of the resources that House Hess had left here at their siege location after of course we had defeated them. I suppose as they were temporarily blinded and trying to flee the location, they weren't able able to deconstruct their massive fortress mortar and take back home with them. Unfortunate. Something else that was unfortunate though as well is the fact that we actually can't claim it and reinstall it back home. These fortress mortars are so large, unfortunately we will have to deconstruct it for resources. After that was finally completed, we did indeed have a new research project for Lim to begin working on. We actually have installed the Winter Plants mod. This mod of course will actually add several different types of plants that specifically grow in climates such as our eternal winter planet here, which to me just made sense, and it is actually based on a comment by our good friend Riven Faye, who had suggested this mod I believe in episode 1. So Riven Faye, thank you ever so much, and I'm sorry I took so long to get around to it. Sometime later though, we did finally arrive at the location where Sissy the Brave had been fatally injured. Luckily though, the extreme cold seems to have sealed the wound. It seems that he has stuffed snow and ice into the wound until eventually it froze over. Truly a miracle indeed. We didn't see any threat nearby or anything like that, so we offered him some help and he joined us. We then of course quickly carried him out of the area and began making the extremely long, excruciating and cold journey all the way back home. Once again though, as I mentioned earlier, due to the climate here and whatnot, it would take a very long time to get back home, so sitting here and watching isn't going to do anything. It would be quite boring. Luckily though, I have something exciting. Well, exciting for you guys to watch and extremely scary and dangerous for me to deal with. Essentially, a dimensional rift has ripped open in our world and these elemental creatures are going to begin pouring out of it and trying to rip us apart. Got it? Good. There happen to be 4 different types of elemental rifts, but fittingly ours appears to be an ice rift, most likely due to the spell that is on the planet, no doubt. The creatures did end up catching us off guard. Unfortunately, Rosh and Irene were outside of the keep walls, so they immediately began trying to run away from this massive ice elemental that was chasing them down. After killing the large elemental, I done my best to try and bring the 2 of them back towards the city entrance and try to get them inside with the others. Unfortunately though, Rosh ended up falling. I even tried to use our ace in the hole, which was Moin Cow's massive abilities, but it seemed to do no damage to the elementals, although they did get away before I really got to use it. Now I will say that there are 2 ways out of an elemental assault. You either just wait it out and more elementals will eventually come through and most likely overrun you and kill everyone, or you can try and destroy the rift, and we decided to go with the latter. Much easier said than done. As we were beating on it, more elementals came through the rift. We tried to run away from them and hide for a little bit. As they began going after Irene, we came back in and started beating on the rift once more, finally causing it to begin self-imploding. I began trying to rush everyone inside of the base away from the portal just in case there was a massive explosion. I kind of forgot what it was like when it imploded. After we got everyone in though, I realized it just kind of fizzles out. Even with the rift destroyed though, we still had a few elementals that we needed to deal with, and we did indeed need to deal with them right away because Irene and Rosh were injured out on the battlefield. Eventually though, thankfully we did manage to make it to both of them. We quickly scooped them up into our arms and began trying to rush back to the base. Unfortunately though, I think I underestimated the severity of Irene's wounds, so we had to throw her down there on the ground and just try to tend to her as she was, but unfortunately we were interrupted by an elemental. She was bleeding very badly, and in the end she didn't make it. A grievous and devastating loss, and the first that we've actually experienced here in the Eternal Winter series thus far. I unfortunately was not able to save her at all, and we ended up bringing her into our throne room where I would end up giving many of our colonists time to grieve. I wish that there were some type of way that I could have tried to prevent this. Unfortunately, I think even if we began tending to her where she lie there on the ground instead of trying to carry her back to the base, she still would have ended up bleeding to death just because of how severe her wounds were, and Zippy and Lim neither could have stopped the bleeding that fast. So of course, unfortunately, I could not save her in life, nor of course can I save her in death, but at the very least we could try to give her a good funeral. As something of a show of respect and honor, I decided that the first few of our colonists, of course, especially a member such as Irene, who is a starting member, will be buried in our throne room. Thankfully, her funeral turned out to be good, good, giving everyone a very slight mood buff. Hopefully this will try to help them cope with her loss. As I mentioned earlier, losing Irene is indeed a monumentous loss, not only because she is our friend, but she had a lot of useful skills and she did a lot around the keep. Truly, I think this just goes to show how dangerous these elemental assault events really are. They're not all that common, but when they do happen, you have to be extremely prepared. A couple of days later though, our caravan had finally returned home, our two warriors along with our new warrior known as Sissy. Sissy seemed to have just enough gear on so that he was beating hypothermia. Regardless of that though, he seemed to have a pretty decent skill set, with his best skills of course being melee as well as crafting, which we could definitely use around here. Because of his lack of warm clothing, we decided to have Rosh here go ahead and whip up a nice warm cloth cloak for him. And of course, while he was at it, I was gonna go ahead and have him whip up a few more for anyone else that may end up needing one. Sissy began putting on the cloak with haste, and just as well, I allowed him to begin equipping some other apparel as well as weapons. It would appear that he put on his nice cloak, a yellow hood, and of course some chainmail, as well as a massive double-edged steel battle axe. It wasn't perfect, but it would do for now. Eventually, I would like to research some better armors, which we are still currently working on, and we'll get something specific done here for Sissy, as he's going to be a melee horse for us. Now, of course, you did just hear me say that we are researching into different armors and whatnot, and we have been, but currently we're not actually doing that. We are currently still working on our winter plants research, which of course, as you can see, Lim and Robin just finished up for us. So of course now, thankfully, with this research completed, we will be able to plant several different types of winter crops. It was also around this point that I had been looking for Rosh's hat, the one that we had made him previously last episode. He actually dropped it during the elemental assault when he was downed and I couldn't find it. Well, it turns out that Snowdrop has been wearing it. I didn't make her wear this at all. She must have just found it and put it on, and it's just the cutest thing. While we're on the topic of Rosh, he was actually the first one to go out into our new field and begin planting our new winter crop known as Winter Bloom. Now, I decided to go with this crop because it's one of the only ones that we can actually eat other than the berry bushes, I believe. Now, I will say that winter blooms actually take twice as long as rice and have twice the yield, but with the tilled soil, we shouldn't really have any issues. Thankfully, one of my favorite things to come out of this is that we can get rid of these greenhouses. Now, I do like our greenhouses, but I don't like the ones that I actually built. Eventually, I may end up doing something with some planter boxes and some skylights, but that'll probably end up being down the line at some point. But for now, we're just going to stick with our fields of winter blossoms, which honestly, can I just say they're absolutely gorgeous. I love the kind of pale blue color. Now, because of our ever-increasing population, we are of course needing an ever-increasing supply of food, and of course along with that we're going to need an ever-increasing place to put all of the food that we're needing to keep, so we're going to expand our food storage area. I also thought it could be a good idea to make something of a vault for our personal finances, or really the finances of the entire dynasty at this point. So I decided to dig out a very small area in Zippy and Rasha's bedroom where we could actually build 2 iron strong boxes for all of our jade and silver, gold, anything else that we have and can acquire. Sometime later, I decided that it was high time we begin expanding our medieval dynasty and expanding our keep. So I began building some new tower walls with new towers, of course. All of this was going to be built out of granite. Obviously, of course, this was a pretty large task, and it was nothing that we normally couldn't get done fairly easily within maybe about 3 to 4 days, but since Irene was killed in battle, we don't exactly have a designated construction person anymore, making it much more difficult and making it take much longer, so we'll have to check back in on that later. Now, we hadn't really had too many issues out of animals in the area, except for a few mad hares and things like that recently happened, but I did notice that some ibex rams were actually eating our winter bloom plants. As you could imagine, this was a very big problem, one that we intended to solve. with violence. As we caught them sleeping near our fields, we would then plunge our blades into them, killing them. This would happen several times, with basically as many as we could find, to ensure that they didn't eat any more of our crops. We finally were able to make our first meals out of our winter bloom, and they seem to have turned out alright. Nothing too fancy, of course, but as long as it fed our little tummies, that's all we were worried about. Now, I also wanted to ask you guys what you thought about a possible flag and or banner for the series, for the Eternal Flame, for basically us here, of course, with our medieval dynasty. If you guys thought that might be a good idea, if it's something you might like to see, and if so, what would you guys like to see? If you want to leave comments with some pretty basic suggestions, we have very basic shapes that we can work with here. I don't want anything too extreme or anything like that. Of course, I would like for it to feature a flame, I believe, as we are the Eternal Flame. Feel free to also submit them in the suggestions channel on our Discord, or even through the business email linked in the channel description. Just whatever you would prefer, but like I mentioned, you don't actually have to do that. You can actually just give me pretty basic descriptions in the comment section if you'd like to do that, or you don't have to do any of that at all. But if you would like to, you very well may inspire me to make one, or I may use your design. And I apologize, of course, because I feel like I constantly ask you guys for your suggestions, but the series is so much more fun to me when we incorporate your ideas, and it feels like our series, not my series. But just before we end the episode here today, Rosh has something special planned. He actually plans on taking young Snowdrop here on her very first actual hunt. A rite of passage, almost an initiation, if you will. Not only, of course, will this determine whether or not she's a good shot during a hunt, but also whether or not she'll be able to fend for herself and protect herself when the time comes. That very small white snow hair there in the distance would be the perfect target. Due to its natural camouflage, it won't be too easy to hit. A perfect shot, a direct hit right into the rabbit's heart. Truly astonishing for someone of her age. It would appear that young Snowdrop here has truly proved herself to her father here today, as well as the entire dynasty. She will definitely be a worthy heir to the throne. But until that day comes, we'll have to settle for her killing bunny rabbits, bringing back home for her mama to chop up, and cook into some simple meals for her to enjoy by the table. Even after a satisfying hunt with her father, there's nothing like a mother's love. But my good dear friends, I am afraid to say that this episode is winding down to an end, though I have hoped that you've enjoyed as much as you've seen today. But of course, before I bid you farewell for the day, I do want to take a moment and discuss a teeny tiny little bit of lore, and just as well, I also want to announce the monarch title that we're going with for Zippy as well as Rosh here in the dynasty. Several of you guys have decided that you like the term Jarl, so I think that is a really good title for Rosh, and I also think that Lady Zippy is also a really good title for Zippy, of course, and any other monarchs in the future that we end up having, such as Snowdrop, once of course she inevitably ends up taking Rosh's place. I would be lying though if I said that I didn't really like the term Jarl, of course, because I'm biased. I have to be honest. I'm a huge Skyrim fan, so obviously Jarl is really going to tickle my little fancy for me, so that is part of why it won, but also because so many of you guys seem to really be interested in that title and really like that title, so that's also why we went with it, of course. And now, of course, though, before we end the video, I do have a little bit of lore here I would like to incorporate into the series. So this is a comment by our friend GravyGamer8628, who says that their idea for the lore of the series is that Rosh was a descendant of the empire that caused the eternal winter. His ancestors were part of the Empire's royal bloodline and hid away when the Empire left the world, which would mean that his ancestors would be descendants of some of the factions on the world. Now, I really like this comment about lore for a lot of reasons. I think first and foremost, I really like it because this kind of almost explains why Rosh has this natural leadership ability and just natural leadership aurora around him, right? Or at least in my opinion. Not only that though, it also does explain why he has has several relatives, some of which coming from the Imperials of this planet, right? The Empire faction here on the planet. So it all does make sense and it all adds up. But not only that, with that being said as well, if his descendants actually left the planet long ago when their technological era was obviously, you know, their technological capabilities, I should say, were much more than our own, that also opens this series to being linked up with many other series. It could even be connected with our RKRU timeline. Oh no, I know a lot of you guys asked me originally if this takes place in that universe, and I was pretty hesitant to say yes just in case, but could this be the planet where the humans from the RKRU actually came from? I leave that up to you guys to decide. I'm actually very open to adding this into the RKRU as something of a prequel planet where the humans originally came from. Now, I will say though, if that does end up being the case, it does make things a little bit messy seeing how this series has magic and whatnot, but I guess the magic of this planet could possibly be explained maybe by some type of nuclear mutations or something, you know, with the nuclear waste and whatnot that happened here on this planet, the nuclear war. But like I said, I'll leave that up to you guys. I'm pretty open to adding this into the RKRU, but I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. I love you guys ever so much, and I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.